What discoveries are you making? And what are you doing about it? That's it. Nothing more, nothing less.
Well, me and Curtis Carnes go way back, actually.
Way back.
Way back. He and I grew up, we were just like one neighborhood separated. So, it was a whole like bike riding route. Like he was kind of on my route to ride my bike anywhere. If I'm going to Little Caesars, I'm passing his house. But he was the neighborhood just adjacent. So we grew up playing on the same soccer team and going to school together and everything. And fast forward all these years and we reconnected on LinkedIn. I think he was making a pivot to become a coach potentially in his career. And so he saw what I had been doing and reached out and we reconnected. It was kind of fun because it was one of those people, it wasn't awkward, like we had to catch up on our whole life the past 20 years. Right. It was just like pick up like...
Oh, that is cool.
Yeah, and we weren't necessarily best friends, but we were in each other's lives a bunch.
Yeah, on the bike route.
Yeah, on the bike route. But also the soccer team because, that's like, I don't know how it was for you with sports, but it's like we were together all the time. But at that age, you don't like talk and connect a lot. You're just doing things side by side. So it's like, I still don't know you much, Curtis, but we spent a lot of time together.
100%.
Yeah, there was that dynamic of like, so who are you anyway? Even though we grew up together.
It's like, I thought you were my best friend, but I don't really actually know anything about you.
Yeah.
It's the way I feel about pretty much anyone I grew up playing on a team with.
Yeah. And then there's that weird, like, who are you as an adult now?
Yeah.
Calibration.
Who even were you? And then who are you now?
Yeah. 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 So anyway, when we were talking about him launching a business, he was of course curious of what have I done and what's worked and wanting to learn from that. And so we got to talking about how hard it is to actually build a base of paying clients. Like everyone wants to start a business, but no one talks about how hard it is to actually like sell a thing for money. And in the coaching world and people like that, we're also afraid to talk about money like it's a bad thing. So I'm very open about it. Like I love just putting it on the table and just talking, really like say the word money. Stop like beating around the bush. And Curtis is like that too. He likes to just go straight at things head on. And so we were talking a lot about that and how it takes so much grit and perseverance to get paying customers. Like the fact that we're so wired to like do one thing one time and want it to work. But like sales and building a business is one of those things where you have to do the same boring, repetitive, difficult task 1,000 times before you even get one result. And so we started talking about how helpful it is to have groups where it's like you can encourage each other and like help each other press through those perseverance types of things. And I said, yeah, I've been really wanting a group like that because in the business world, there's so many bad versions of groups.
Just networking events.
Networking groups and all this weird stuff that's overly structured, stuff that's overly fake. And how much I crave just like a genuine, real group of people trying to pursue the same goals. He said, oh, I've been thinking about the same thing and might be starting a group because he had led a lot of, like he had basically come up with his own framework for how to lead a group really well, like that. A group pursuing any kind of goal together. And so he was telling me a little bit about it, and next thing you know, we were like creating this group together. And what was cool, I'm curious your take, because what was cool to me is it became something very different than what I expected at the beginning.
Because we were talking a lot about sales.
Yeah.
We're like, it was a lot of us who wanted to grow, and so like holding each other accountable. Like I was thinking of it almost as like a sales.
Yeah, taking the steps you need to take in order to grow and get more business. And again, to the point of like, because there's no other conversation or people in your life who can help with that, or they're scared to talk about money. Yeah. It's like, no, that's kind of the core of a business. So that was refreshing to me, the idea of being in a group like that with Curtis, who's a very straightforward person who will just say the thing, but he's also super genuine and has a huge heart and like, he's 100% the real deal. So I was excited, but then the group, kind of became something.
Well, what's ironic is I would venture to say half of us in the group, our takeaway and action items were cutting clients. when
Yeah.
we wanted to grow. It was like,
Yeah.
no, let's actually scale back to do the thing that we really want to do,
Yeah.
which is cool.
Yeah.
And you were, like ended up growing more during it. So it wasn't like one or the other. It was just
Right.
what's the real thing. And then he talks obviously a lot about breakthrough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I didn't even quite know what was on his mind, but he had like a book in the works, I think really early stages in his head. But then by the end of the group, he had actually written the book.
Yeah.
And so he explains more about that framework, because that's the whole idea, is like no matter what the goal is, growing a business or something totally different, there's a process that works to have breakthroughs and reach those goals. So what would you say was your biggest thing or takeaway from that group?
Well, I think he mentions it in the episode, but one of the questions he would ask a lot is like, what would you do if you had like unlimited courage? Or like essentially asking like, what's the thing that you know you want to go after, but you're talking yourself out of? And for me, I've been doing production and I love that, but I've been wanting to grow more, creating my own content and growing that side of the business. And I was tricking myself into think I was doing it, but I was doing it like 4 hours a week, getting like the leftover time. And so for me, it looked like what I was saying. I was like, I'm going to scale back clients. I'm going to do 2 days a week of client work, which feels ridiculous. And I'm going to go after this and give it like my first part of my effort, not the leftovers. And it was crazy. Like a month after the group ended, like I was monetized on YouTube. And it's just like, oh yeah, there's something to it of like when it's your main goal and you're going after it versus a side goal that it's what you really want. It's where your vision is, but it's getting 10%, 5% of your effort.
I find I've done so many of these types of groups and I still discount them all the time. Like I still actually think about the group that we did with Curtis.
Yeah.
Like, not sure if it was really worth the time, because like there's so much to do every day. Do I really want to sit there and go around and share what we're all doing? I still actually in my head kind of think it's not worth it, even though every time it is the big push you need, because without other people and a structured thing like that, there's nothing forcing you to like keep moving in the direction you want to go. You're just pulled in all the other directions every day. I don't know, that's so odd to me, like how much those kind of groups work when they're done well, but I still don't actually think they matter.
Well, it just doesn't make sense to, when you're busy, to take more time to talk or think about things.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense. But there's something to be said about just saying your vision and goals out loud, I think.
Yeah.
Where at least for me, and I would venture to say a lot more people, it can live internally, disconnected from everything, and it's very real to you. But you're never really translating into action because it's just like this piece that I'm holding inside versus saying out loud and being held accountable and having people help me. Like,
yeah, there's something about when you say your vision and goals out loud, it almost like pulls it from the back of your head to the front. And then it lives longer in the front. Maybe only a few days, and then fades back, but that's why a group that meets consistently keeps pulling it back to the front.
And then they ask you about it. And you're like, well, actually, I got sidetracked. I was working on
Actually, I didn't do
else.
anything. Yeah, especially when it's a group that's not like laced with judgment and guilt, but it's more like, no, we're in this together. I think there's also a part of it where, like, I remember the time you said that goal and vision you had and that realization of where you're actually putting your time. And if you just said that out loud, whatever, to a friend or to yourself, you'd move right past it. So it would actually have only occupied like 30 seconds to 1 minute of your life. But in the group, then we all drill down and we're asking questions and digging deeper. And so we actually spent like 20 minutes on that topic. And I think that's another thing we discount in our current culture is like spending more physical time on a topic makes it come to life and be more real.
Well, and when I would say it, even when I said it in the group or if I said it to a friend, I'm minimizing the vision, the dream, because I'm like trying to like put it in the context of reality. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm like, well, like something kind of like this, and I'm telling like 30% of what I want. And then you're like, hold on, what did you mean by that? And doubling down on it, and more is coming to light from it. And I don't know, I think that's very valuable.
It's why I think books are still working and almost gaining popularity, even though like you'd think in our digital world, like books would be irrelevant. No, they still work because it's talking about one topic for such a long period of time that it forces your brain to not just like think about it and move on, but actually like steep in it. And I think there's something to the amount of time you spend on an idea that really matters, but I don't know that we think that way.
Yeah. Well, it's because it's like, if I grasp the concept, then I should be good, right?
I should be good to go.
But it doesn't work like that.
Yeah. Well, so I think what's exciting to me about this conversation is Curtis, he's a really, I just love his personality. He has a uniqueness to the way that he communicates and the way he's so passionate about something and kind of can catch your attention. But also he describes a bit of the framework that we used in the group and that's in his book, Breakthroughs Are Everywhere. And I love, the title is just so him. I love that that's where he landed, because knowing him, you know, our whole lives in a sense, I'm like, yeah, that's Curtis 100%. He was always on the soccer team. He was the center midfielder. And so you had all these, and some people on our team became superstars. Like the forward, Jacob, became like the leading guy in the MLS for a while. And so he was surrounded by all these awesome people. Not me, I was on the bench. But I always noticed Curtis had this way of being kind of invisible, and he was in the middle of the field, but he was actually, without him, none of the superstars would shine, because he had a way of like delivering the ball. He was literally the hub. I mean, he'd be in the middle and he'd like take a pass from the left, quickly turn to the right and deliver it over here. And he would always like make the perfect delivery to the right person at the right time. And so I don't remember if it made it on the episode, but we talked about that a bit, how like that, I mean, that was the coach in him right there. Kind of that invisible like facilitator behind the scenes that actually helps people be at their best. And the midfielder gets no credit. Like no one's actually ever singing their praises or saying like, it's like the bassist in a band, you know? Like, no, actually like he made the whole thing work.
Yeah.
And the coach knows that, but no one else really sees that. So I think he's got that kind of superpower. And anyway, it was fun to have him on. How many breakthrough groups have you done now?
I mean, in the current, most recent iteration, I'm in my third, but I've done so many iterations of this for over 10 years.
Yeah.
You know, where you're trying to help people make discoveries in action, but I've just crystallized it into a current iteration, which I'm excited to get out there.
How did you feel about our group? Like what was your, looking back on it, do you think it was, where does it stand in the lineup of groups you've done?
Great. Like all I care about is self-awareness to make discoveries, willingness to share that self-awareness in the group, right? Because some people are afraid to, and that people will do the action steps they committed to.
Yeah.
And like I said, the breakthrough equation is simple. Discovery times action equals breakthrough. If you're doing those two things, I'm happy. And I thought we did it good. Honestly, in ways, I feel like I was the greatest beneficiary of the group.
That's awesome. Well, you were smart inviting some other coaches into it.
Yeah. because the courage to write the book, I feel like came through that group, and the accountability that provided to finish it when the going got tough was really important for me. That also connected me to David Ramos, was that he overheard that desire, right? And he reached out and gave me an offer to be a writing coach, and it was awesome.
That's so cool. I mean, for me too, it was at a time when, because you and I had been talking before that group about, I had a specific goal of growing this business, Greenhouse, and I wanted to be in a group that would help me with that and help motivate me and keep me on track. And I was just tired of different group settings, group coaching, or whatever you want to call them, different types of groups where you talk about stuff a lot, but you don't necessarily do the stuff.
Yes.
And I was just craving a group where we do the thing. And it was funny because at the same time, your group and another one came up where, I mean, best groups I've ever been in of any type, because we were actually doing the work and taking the steps and not just talking about things and, you know, not just reading a book and talking about a concept.
Yes.
I was so tired of that from corporate life. Well, no, let's actually do the thing we're talking about.
God forbid we do it, right?
Can you imagine such a thing? So anyway, but for people listening, why don't you tee up like the idea of breakthroughs are everywhere, and where did that start for you?
Well, I'm gonna start with my cold open that I've been doing lately, and I'm gonna use you, Steve, and the listeners could be ride along too. Just raise your hand if you had more than one breakthrough in your life, like more than 5, more than 10, more than 25, more than 50. Okay, Steve stopped raising his hand a little bit ago. I want people to have breakthroughs every day, not 1, not 5, not 50, every day. And it took me a while, because it is true, you're going to hear I'm an evangelist for the breakthrough life, but I'm also a convert. Like it's something I've been living over 10 years in my personal life. And I remember, dead end job, career Sweetspot plug. I'm at a dead end job, and I like consuming a ton of information. I wasn't making any progress in my vocation, wasn't making any progress in my marriage, wasn't making any progress in my relationships. And then I got introduced to this idea of an iteration of the breakthrough circle and an iteration of 2 questions. What discoveries are you making? And what are you doing about it?
Yeah.
That's it. Nothing more, nothing less. And it's unnerving, right? When it's like, what discoveries are you making and what are you doing about it? When it's just that. Because you can't hide behind concepts. You can't hide behind ideas. You can't hide behind information. It's just discovery and action. Discovery and action.
I mean, to me, one of the most exciting parts is how simple and basic it is, because both being in like the world of coaching and leadership, company culture, that's just it. There's so many, it's all about the next big concept and the next big research finding. And I think I need to check myself sometimes, because I can be very, sometimes I can get really cynical lately about that stuff.
Yes.
But it's because I'm so tired of all of these big concepts and things that we get excited about. And yet we so few of us actually do the basics well.
Yes.
And I mean, I hate how we compare it to fitness so much, but it really is true. It's like, we all know exercise, eating right, like these things, the basics aren't very sexy, but like doing those consistently is where actually most of the transformation comes through. And I find that with your breakthrough concept, it's like, yeah, not rocket science, but how many of us do this consistently and just that word, do it, versus talk about it.
Well, we bought into this myth that I call the information myth. If you just had more information, you'd have the breakthroughs you want in your life. And guess what? We got Google, podcasts, this podcast, even my book. Like, there's so much, workshops, conferences, and are people making breakthroughs all the time? No. So there must be a different process. There must be a different way. And really, the last 10 years has just me just distilling and distilling and distilling what that is, how to have them, what the process looks like, modeling it myself. Because if I can't practice what I preach, man, like it's not there. Helping others people do it, and the outgrowth is this book. Breakthroughs are everywhere. And it took me a while to find the title. I had like 100 titles on this Google document, right? It's like, what's the title for this book? And then Nancy's like, my wife, sorry for listeners, Nancy, my wife, 17 years married, says, breakthroughs are everywhere. That's that's it. And like when she said it, I'm like, yeah, because we just believe that breakthroughs are rare. We do.
Yeah, we do. And it's funny to me that I didn't see all the titles, but I'm sure a lot of them were like overly complicated. and then the title that works is just so basic. And I feel like it fits the concept. The concept is, we think that breakthroughs have to be this big fancy thing. And they're always really like game-changing, life-changing. And I love how you talk about that sometimes they can just be everyday small things, but they're there's still breakthroughs. So we need to almost redefine the word.
Yeah, I'm 100%. Like, I would just a simple one. I'm with my son. We're playing together at night after work, right? And like, he was kind of getting frustrated, kind of getting angry, just about small things. And like, I after he went to bed, I looked back, and I'm just looking back. I'm like, man, I wasn't really present in that moment. I wasn't really present, and I'm just kind of just thought back, man, if I just so then I realized, man, it wasn't a him issue, it was a me issue. It was like that little discovery. Okay, man, those 2 to 3 hours after I'd come home from work, how do I need to show up for him?
Yeah.
Right. And like, so that just, and honestly, that may sound small, but it's actually pretty big, right? Like that discovery. So, okay, what am I going to do now about that? Right. How am I going to kind of work around the circle and do something about that discovery?
Yeah. Explain a bit about the circle and what that looks like.
Yeah. The circle, it begins with an inflection point. And an inflection point is a moment, is the moment in time where significant change may occur. All right. And the key words may. Like, it's up to you. You can choose if that significant change occurs or not. And it's just two things: discovery and action. And discovery, I have 3 steps for, and action, 3 steps. The first 3 steps of discovery, the first one's observe. I'd say the number one reason people aren't making breakthroughs in their life is they're not looking for them.
Mm-hmm.
That's the number one reason. We're just not looking. We don't think they're there. We don't believe they're there. And for me, that's the key. Whether it be in a coaching relationship, a breakthrough group, or even my own personal life, is like, am I looking for them? Is my vision like wide enough and deep enough to see them?
Yeah, I've found that to be one of the more common things that comes up in coaching conversations, is helping people to implement the action of noticing.
Yes.
And even that sentence sounds so weird, because I think in our cultural context, it's a passive thing. Like we view it as a passive thing, but it's actually an active thing. And you're right. It's often we are moving so fast and we have so many things flying at us, and we fill all of our time. I do it all the time. I can't stand there for 20 seconds without pulling out my phone. It's just like we fill all of the voids. And so therefore we've gotten even worse at noticing. And it really does start there. It's like a muscle you have to build, how to actively notice. And it sounds so passive, but it's actually, it's so huge.
100%. Like, I encourage 2 things. I think there's like active noticing and also kind of reactive noticing. An example of active is like, man, I'm going to sit down for 15 minutes with a journal, right? And just be like, man, what are just some observations I'm noticing? What am I noticing in my professional life? What am I noticing in my personal life? And then there's that reactive observation. That's like when I was with Jay after work, right? Like, he's getting angry. I'm not present. I could tell his frustration is probably more to do with that than him being mad at something else, right? I wasn't looking for it, but I was ready for it. You know what I'm saying? That it's a key.
Yeah, ready for it, because it is something you have to. It's almost like a posture that you have to show up with.
Yes.
That if you haven't learned or thought about it, then our default posture is not usually noticing.
100%. But I'll be the first to admit, how many times have me or even you, did we notice something, we observe something, and then we do nothing with it, right?
Well, that's what I was gonna. Yeah, I know. I was gonna say, like, so how do you even? I mean, the challenge there could be, well, I'm going to notice stuff all day long. What do I do? I can't. There's not enough time to do something with all of that.
Yeah, 100%. that's where you have to kind of just embed times in your schedule to reflect. And that's the second step on the breakthrough circle is reflect. It's just, just starting to ask classic coaching questions, right? Like, well, why was that important to me? Like, what's behind that observation? How does it make me feel? What am I noticing about the observation? There's thousands of questions we could ask. And for me, it's embedding time in your schedule to do that. Like some people like doing it in the morning, some people like doing it in the evenings. But for me, it's usually the morning. Like that's my time where I just kind of reflect on my past day and the day ahead and just trying to have that space where I could reflect just in that 24-hour period.
Yeah. Another thing I like about that is it enables you to not miss the opportunities.
Yeah.
Because again, I think a common objection, and one that I've felt before, is like, well, we got to get stuff done. We're busy people, achievers.
Yeah.
Like you can't just sit there and reflect all the time. No time for that. Or like that's a worthless activity. And the reality is business is what taught me this. I remember I was being interviewed once and they said how, like compared to peers who started at a similar time or a similar kind of business, like what's made you more successful than them? And I said, well, it's kind of interesting because I don't think about that a lot. But if I had to answer it, I think it's the act of, it's part of my weekly rhythm to reflect on the week and what worked well and what didn't.
Yes.
And ironically, what worked well was the biggest instrument for growth, because it's like, well, while everyone else is having a mini success and passing it by and then making the same mistakes over and over, like I was catching more of those and then building on them. And so that accelerates growth because there's so many things each week to notice and build off of. But if you're just super busy, you miss them and then you kind of go back to square one the next week again.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, one of my favorite books is Linchpin by Seth Godin. And he says over 90% of that value bringing activities come from 3% of our workday. Not the 80-20 rule, 3%. Yeah. So like for me, it's like, how can I get people into that space, right? It's a posture to get into that 3% space. And that's what this book is all about. How do we get people in that 3% space? How do we get my coaching clients in that 3% space? How do we get the breakthrough group people in the 3% space? Because real value bringing activity, professional or personal, comes from there. Mm-hmm. So the question should never be, what are the 100 things I should do? Is no, how can I get in that 3% space? How can I posture myself for that 3% space?
Yeah.
And everything's about that. That's all I do is get people into that 3% space.
Uh-huh. Yeah, which you look at any top athlete. Lately, I've been watching a lot of like athlete documentaries.
Yeah.
And I don't know, the sports analogies never have resonated big for me, but it is interesting when you watch these. It's like the 3% space, it's all they do. I mean,
yes.
That's what they're focused on. They're focused on the process more than the result. They're focused on those small things that make a big difference. And they do it over and over, and that's what sets them apart. Whereas all of us are, the common thing is just kind of like shiny object syndrome. And we might learn a process like this and do it for a week, and then by next week we've forgotten the whole thing. Versus, sticking with that over time.
And that's why you say it out loud. That's the third step. Discuss. Is observe, reflect, discuss. Because when you say stuff out loud, just so many things, right? Like I said out loud, I'm going to write this book. And guess what? I decided to say it to a lot of people because I'd be socially embarrassed if I didn't write this book. And the other thing is that when you say it out loud, like it just opens you up to opportunities, resources, and relationships that you never maybe knew or believed were available to you. And
yeah,
it's really cool.
I always laugh because people like to talk about that like manifesting idea. And you say it out loud and the universe will bring it to you. And I mean, I think what's funny to me about that is oftentimes it's like, yes, that principle is true. It does work. But a lot of times it's just because when you say it out loud, like other people help you get there.
Yes,
It's
100%.
I think we hear that law of attraction as like some magic that it's like, no, it's not actually magical. It's actually quite practical.
No, 100%. And it takes a lot of courage to say something out loud. And you'd be shocked how many times I'm in a client conversation. You probably get this too, Steve, where they say, I've never told this to anyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Have you gotten that in your coaching relationships? Like I've never told this to anyone. And they're not talking about affairs or embezzlement schemes, right?
Right.
Like, they're talking about their dreams, like how they would show up as their authentic self if they could, and what the impact they really want to make on the world. So that's why it's so important to say it out loud.
Well, I know I keep interjecting in the steps, but this is where in our group, two of my biggest breakthroughs came. And it was interesting because you mentioned earlier the active noticing and reactive noticing.
Yeah.
And it was almost like a hybrid of those for me in this situation, because it was like in the group, I kept saying things the same way to the point where you or someone else would point it out. Like, Steve, you keep saying X. And like that was where the noticing happened. So it was kind of in real time, but it was also you guys reactively noticing for me.
Yeah, I love that.
And one of them, you probably remember both, but one of them was that I kept sharing thoughts with you guys that I needed to share with Ashley. And at some point, one of you pointed out, like, why don't you say those to her? And then I did that week, and those were some breakthrough moments for us. Some things that I was like thinking and not saying out loud to her. And then the other one was with business. I kept hitting stuck points with business development and brand where it's like I was trying to solve the problem.
Yeah.
And again, you guys pointed out, like, you keep saying you would love help in this space. So, and it led to me realizing, and the breakthrough was, oh my gosh, I need to find people who are way better at this than me and empower them to do these projects with me instead of, kind of taking it all on myself. And I mean, fast forward till now, and yeah, both of those things have been huge catalysts for growth in the business. And I have a person that's leading each of those.
See, I mean, that's great. I mean, you just reinforce the idea that I hammer home in the book. It's just breakthroughs don't happen alone. They don't. Like if I look back at my life and just look at all my breakthrough moments, like how many breakthroughs have I had in isolation?
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna let you take a guess at one number. 0.
You were looking back. Yeah.
0 breakthroughs. Like everything's been in relation with other people. And the sad thing is that it was only 10, 12 years ago that I started inviting people into my interior world, my interior journey, like this circle that I'm trying to do in my own life. And I lost.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people, they're not inviting people in.
Yeah.
There's a host of reasons why we don't invite other people in the journey. And we lose because of every one of those reasons.
Yeah. Well, and it's a great timing for the book because I do think there's a broader awakening going on in this space, just like in our culture. And to your point, there's probably a lot of catalysts for why we had become so closed off. But I know you and we grew up in the same area. Like we grew up in an area like a lot of people where it was about like doing stuff and pull yourself up by your bootstraps and move forward. And you kind of would like suppress all of the interior world experiences. And not even like emotions necessarily. That's part of it. But I mean, all that stuff, it's just like, no, just push on, push through. And yet, so many of the breakthroughs come from actually, like we're talking about, noticing and gaining insight from what's going on, not pushing through and past it, because then you miss those things.
And Agreed. And what I've just noticed that a lot of people, and I think now this is where we're at. I think in culture, we're starting to get more comfortable with that discovery process. But here's the issue. Discovery times 0 equals no breakthrough. Like, I don't know about you, I have a cathartic experience with talking about my discoveries. It makes me feel good about myself. People seem to be impressed with me when I'm talking about discoveries I'm making personally and professionally. But it doesn't mean I had a breakthrough. The thing that takes a discovery to a breakthrough is action, as we've been talking about this whole time. And that first step is just plan. What's the first step? Sometimes we just lag too. We just get stuck in this discovery, talking about all our friends and family and coworkers about all these discoveries we're making, and we should be asking, what do we need to do? Right? We often lag too far behind. Our action lags too far behind the discovery. So
and in the group experience, and I know in coaching this happens too. Oftentimes you would move very quickly to that. If somebody had an insight, you're like, all right, what are you going to do about it? Or if we were stuck in analysis paralysis, you kind of cut it off and say, all right, so what are you going to do? Like, it's actually pretty simple. And I know that happens in coaching a lot. It's one of the things I love about coaching is true insight and then action immediately, because we think, like, have you ever had a client where this happens where they're like, well, I got to think about that. I got to make some plans. And what they mean is actually weeks or months worth of stewing.
Yes.
And they're like, well, I got to think about that and process that and make a plan. It's like, okay, I get it. Some people are processors internally, but really, I mean, what are you going to do about it? There could be a very immediate action step. I don't think it always needs to be a long drawn out thing that gets us stuck.
Yeah, nor should it, because nothing moves like movement, right? Like, you just start moving and you begin to move and it goes farther down the direction. That's why I always say, what's the first step? Like, even if it's a complex action that you're looking for that you need, like publishing a book. There's a lot of steps in me writing this book, right? And publishing it. What's the first step? And one thing I've noticed, maybe you have too, Steve, with your coaching clients, is that people are worst case scenario people. And what I like to do is ask questions like this. Man, what's your greatest possible imagined future? Like, if this worked out, what would your life be like? And there's something way more motivating about that, right? Than thinking about all the things that could go wrong, right?
Yeah. Well, and for anyone listening who's inspired by that, I'd say even a step further, if you've seen it, the tendency is to shoot that question down. It's like, well, maybe I answer you, it might look like this, but that's not realistic.
Yeah.
And it's like we immediately back away because it's uncomfortable to imagine something being so awesome. And in some ways that's good and realistic. We know that life isn't perfect, but it's like, ask yourself again. I love in those moments to ask someone again the same question.
Yes.
And it's really uncomfortable for a moment because they're like, I just answered you. And it's like, no, keep asking until you give me an answer and you stop backing away from it.
Yes. No, I'm with you. Another one of my favorite questions is that if you were full of courage, what would you do right now? Because that always guides the way. Like, just pretend you were courageous for a moment, right? What would you do? And to be honest with you, mine was write this book, right?
Yeah.
That's what it was in our breakthrough group. And I've seen other people say, man, I'm going to negotiate my salary. I'm going to present a new position that's not even on the org chart, right? Like, I'm going to become a 2-day CEO. Like, that's what I would do if I was full of courage. And man, it's so cool when you begin to answer that question.
Well, yeah, because it almost shortcutted all the things that probably would have taken 10 years to write that book.
Yes.
And instead you wrote it in like less than a year. I mean,
exactly.
Okay, so wait, but what are the other parts of the action?
Yeah, so the first one's plan. The next one's just account, and account is accountability. And I'm gonna give you a secret to accountability. This is what often people do in like coaching relationships or corporate. It's like we're gonna tell you what to do, right? And the goal is, if you're working with the circle yourself, is to set up an accountability metric for yourself. If you're guiding someone else through it, I'm gonna give you the platinum accountability question. What question do you want me to ask you the next time we meet?
Yeah.
Right. If that question then they give you the question they want to be asked. It assumes accountability. They've taken ownership over both the plan and the accountability metric. And then the rest is history if they keep moving forward.
Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you what kept me in the past from sharing my interior world with people and from noticing insights and things was because I did not want someone to sit there and give me advice that I thought wasn't relevant.
Yes.
And I was, in a sense, terrified of people just like giving me dumb advice that I don't want, because everyone defaults to that. And the beauty of this process is, like you're saying, it's not giving each other advice. It's actually so much of the insight and discovery comes through how people react to what you said, or a story that they share, or what they, like in my examples, how they reflected back to me what I was saying out loud and not hearing myself say over and over.
100%. I'm feeling, I hear you. And then the last step is the fun part. It's when you do it, whatever it is, you act. And the cool thing about the action part, the sixth step of the breakthrough circle, is that's when the breakthrough happens. The book's written, right? Your company crushes its goals. You go on that dream trip with your spouse. Like, it's when you actually do it and you get to enjoy the benefits of the breakthrough. Like, that's the exciting part. That's what we're working towards, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. Have you gotten, what kind of feedback or sound bites have you heard so far since the book came out?
Man, I've gotten some great sound bites. My favorite one is, I gave it to someone at 4 p.m. Okay? So 4 p.m. on a day. I was going to see that person 2 hours later at dinner. Okay? She's like, she came up jumping excited, like intense, excited to tear me down. She's like, I read the whole book. It gave me the courage to leave my job and become a professional fiction writer. I'll put my 2 weeks notice in. I'm like, oh, pause. Pause button. Like
actually, the framework, you're not supposed to act that quick. So actually, hold on, give me the book back.
And I know she's going to do it. But she was thinking about it a little bit before. It's just, you need courage to do it. Like, this is my favorite quote. My favorite Amazon review is actually from a guy that we both know. I don't want to. We'll just say Dan's the first name. We won't say the last name.
Okay, I know who you are, Dan.
He just said this: beware. If you read this book, you might actually do that thing you've been wanting to do for a long time.
Oh my gosh.
That's exactly what I want people to feel. I want people to feel like it can be them. Yes, you can be that person that does X, Y, or Z. And that's what I'm trying to do, is get people to believe that it can be them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I'm a living testament to it too. And I think, to circle back on something I said earlier, because it's almost ironic, like, if breakthroughs are everywhere, then they're not actually that dramatically unique.
Yes.
But to your point, they are, even those little daily things can actually be pretty life-changing. And I'm just curious what you think, where people start with this, because I know for me, right when you introduced the concept, my first reaction was, I mean, I'm already so busy, so like I can't notice 10 things a day and then do something with all of them. And if anyone feels that overwhelmed, what do you say to that?
My first statement's like, how's that busyness working for you? Like, that's my response. Because I say that, we like feeling busy. I like feeling busy. It makes me feel good about myself. It maybe escape some emotions I might be feeling about in any given situation or moment. Like, there's so many reasons why I stay busy. And then I realize if I look back and like if we were to take like a reflection time on our actions, like, is our busyness derived by anxiety? Is it derived by your boss? Is it derived by anyone that's not you, right? Or is it derived by your discoveries? So I'm not asking people to be significantly less busy. I'm just asking people to derive their action from something that actually creates a breakthrough.
I want to give a very, very clear next step to take after this podcast, because Curtis gave a lot of practical framework. I mean, he laid it out. Like, here's the approach, and the book goes into more detail. And I think we'll have him back on in a few months to talk really more of the nuanced and depth parts of the book. But here's what I want to say, because I know in coaching sessions, what tends to happen is people hear a framework like this or get excited about something like this, and you start to get hung up on your own fears or roadblocks. And I think with this kind of framework, the tendency is, well, I'm a little bit worried to try and do this because of what it might bring up. It might actually challenge me to do something different than I'm doing it now. And it's just easier and more comfortable to do how I'm doing it now. But I think there's a second piece to that. And it's probably the fact that I don't really know if it's realistic to make a big breakthrough, to take a step in a very different direction. And what I mean by that is, just like the example I shared, when I realized I was the bottleneck for a lot of things in the company, and I needed to invite some other people in to help and to own stuff. The reality of my day-to-day is that's a big change, and I don't feel like I have time to deal with a big change. And I like the challenge that Curtis put out there, that how is busyness working for you? Like, just being busy, doing the same things over and over, what are the results that are coming out of that? And if you don't like the current results, or you want something different, then it would be kind of that definition of insanity to keep doing it the same way. But we all do this. I find myself doing this constantly. And so I think I just want to give a permission slip here to try something called a 1-week test sprint. And anyone from the world of product design or tech startups, you might be familiar with this idea of doing a sprint, meaning a small time increment, usually 1 or 2 weeks, where you test out the idea. And what I love about this is it kind of frees you up from all those fears and all those, that I mentioned. Instead of being hung up on, well, I'm not going to have time to make that kind of a shift, or there's too much to do as it is. It gives you a safe place, almost like a sandbox, where you can play with this idea apart from the rest of reality. And then you can decide what to do with it. So a lot of times what this looks like is, all right, I like this idea Curtis presented. I want to take notice. Maybe you just grab a notebook. I like to have a specific notebook for these kinds of observations, or a specific app on my phone where you are keeping notes. And whether that's in the morning or at night or throughout the day, you're noticing and keeping a list of the things you notice. Then have a separate time when you review those notes and decide what to do with it. And so I personally like the idea of keeping notice throughout the day, and then having one time per day, call it at the end of the day, when you read through the list and decide what to do with those things. And so you can just do it for a week. Just make it a 1 week experiment where you're going to try and see what happens. And then you can decide after that what to do with it. But I want to caution against feeling like this is such a big shift that you can't even get started. And so if you're in that space at all, make it a 1 week sprint, just test it out and see what happens. And this is a classic type of scenario to work with a coach like Curtis, or anyone at Greenhouse can help as well, to help you implement these ideas, build these new muscles, and figure out what to do with the insights. Like Curtis said, it's really hard to do it on your own. Breakthroughs always come in community and relationship with others. So I really like that approach. And if you're like me, you're finding that process of discovery is actually not weakness, like we may have been taught, but it's actually strength, because through that process of discovery, you're actually not inviting in a bunch of advice and things that might not apply to you, but you're inviting in insight, which could come through people's reactions or comments or stories, your own insight through noticing yourself, and finding a better way to do something, or a better approach that really moves you into the spaces that you want to be in.